So I don't really know what to make of that particular subject here, but we're going to find out, and the person who's going to tell us what happens when they walk into a bar is Tim Jones. So please give Tim a warm welcome.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So hello, to start with. I'm Tim Jones, as you just heard. I'm CCO at Meanwhile and co-founder. We're a creative agency based up in Manchester. This should be playing, but it's not. That's a video of some of our work. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Before we started Meanwhile, I was a creative director at BBC Creative for about 6 years, and before that worked in lots of agencies, big and small. From a very early age, a career in the commercial arts was clearly awaited me, as when I was 10 years old, I spent one summer going door to door selling pictures of Garfield for 50p. It's pretty good, right? I thought they were good, but I sold 3. I managed to find a more lucrative outlet for my obvious talents over the years, which is good because I've got 2 kids now and quite an unhealthy trainer habit that all need feeding. So this should also be playing, but it doesn't matter. Again, I'll describe it to you. It's that man dancing with his maracas. Throughout my career, I've always been sort of driven to push for different, push against the conventional norms of what's expected in advertising and do something different. It's something my co-founders, James and Al at Meanwhile, share as well. We all look to do that sort of work at the agency, and it's always been really important to us. It's why we're called Meanwhile. There's always that thing out there that we could be doing slightly different. It's why we're also based in Manchester. We could have set up in London, but being in Manchester just sets us aside, and we've got nice houses up there as well. It's why also we launched with this guy. So this guy, for anyone that doesn't know, is Bez from the Happy Mondays, and we sort of launched with this, with Bez as sort of Manchester's ultimate hype man, as a way to stand out, and it did, and it worked. It got us noticed, it got us in the industry press, it's got us invited onto podcasts to talk about the agency, and it kind of goes into a little bit of what I want to talk about today, and the sort of how we can push to do different work in interesting ways. Cool. Oh, some of this is playing. That's good. We always, throughout our careers, have always looked to sort of what everyone else does, and then sort of not do that, basically try and do something different. So, that kind of approach is something that we really love to do. It has to be there. It has to be inherent in the thinking. It has to be inherent in the idea. But a good idea is just the beginning. Making a good idea great takes real effort, real energy. It can be, one way of doing it is from a really relentless commitment to craft, and that's something we really did really well when at the BBC, whether it's creating an ad made out of 608 individually embroidered frames of tapestry, to launch the World Cup in Russia. Sorry, that's a spoiler alert. Or using mixed media. Again, these look great when they play, but unfortunately they don't seem to be doing it. But yeah, we used a huge amount of mixed media for the Winter Olympics. We used CGI, sort of algorithmic patterns, and stop motion again to launch the Winter Olympics, and we smashed the eclectic world of Tokyo and the Olympic Games together to launch the Tokyo Olympic Games, which, as you've already had a sneak peek, if it will move, led to us winning this, which, thought I'd just share that I won a BAFTA, which I'm pretty proud of. So shows the power of this sort of thinking that I'm going to talk about today can have. So that sort of approach is great, but then another way of sort of pushing good to great is kind of what I want to focus on and talk more about today. Meanwhile, we like to call it leaving room for the magic, which is also the title of this presentation, as well as the walking into the bar one. So leaving room for the magic is all about just sort of leaving room for the unexpected thinking, sort of not being too rigid in the creative process. Thinking that doesn't necessarily appear on a media plan, isn't necessarily on a deliverables list or appear on a creative brief. And actually sort of like just that unexpectedness can push something on. So all of these examples are examples of, whether at Meanwhile or at BBC Creative, of ways that we sort of explored and how we leave room for the magic, basically. Now, for this to happen, like, it needs a really, really close relationship between creative agencies and media partners. And also like a really open and trusting client as well, to leave those creative and media partners to work together, safe in the knowledge, often without them as well, safe in the knowledge that what we're working on ultimately will benefit them. It's always horrified me, and still does, that creative and media are so often kept apart and not brought together and don't collaborate more often. The idea that the people responsible for coming up with a creative idea don't play a big part in how that creative idea is executed and planned and brought into the world and part of that media plan, and also vice versa, how, you know, a brilliant media planner can unlock a creative idea and bring something really exciting to it. And we started to see the power of this sort of thinking when we're at BBC Creative. I think partly it's down to the benefit of being in-house and being 2 flights of stairs away from your media partners and your marketing team. It really bred sort of this really collaborative approach to work. It didn't happen immediately, it took a year or 2, but after a while at BBC, our media planners started to join like the creative planning and briefing stages of the creative process. And we saw more and more examples of this, sort of like these little magical moments and these little extra little things that don't appear on a media plan or aren't planned from day one. Like, they just started to happen more and more often. And the sort of, wouldn't it be cool if we did this type of work, started to like appear more, and started to actually, how can we actively make room and make space for this sort of thinking to happen across every campaign that we work on. A few examples of this. This bottom example was an extension of that World Cup film. And actually we went on to make this 10-metre tapestry that we hang in the National Football Museum in Manchester. Again, it was never like the intention, but we managed to just find this little idea by working together and collaborating together to just push the campaign forward, again in an unexpected way. So I think critically, like this sort of approach, it needs conscious effort. You need to be aware of it, and for this sort of thinking to happen consistently, you have to just try for it. You can't just leave it down to luck, or you have to plan for it. And that 2 flight of stairs that I mentioned when we were in-house at the BBC is something that we continue to try and recreate as best we can now that we started our own agency. And I really urge anyone in the room to do the same, really. So I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about a handful of projects now. The first of which is a project for A Perfect Planet when we were at BBC. Talk a little bit about the time we set a billboard on fire. So again, this is a lovely looping GIF that goes from a normal billboard to a billboard on fire. But Perfect Planet was all about was a BBC Nature documentary, and every episode explored a different ecosystem where animals had evolved over time to live in perfect harmony with their environment. But the final episode, the 6th and final episode, showed the impact that humans have on that environment. And spoiler alert, it's not good. So just ahead of that final episode airing, we hijacked our own billboards, basically. So these posters that you see here have been up for about 5 weeks, promoting episode to episode. And then for that final episode, we hijacked them all, and we sort of tore them to make the point, basically, that, you know, our planet might be perfect, but if we keep doing what we're doing, then it's not going to be perfect forever. There is a case study I'm not sure it's going to play, but I'll give it a go. Nope. Okay, the case study goes on to explain how that worked and how great it was and how successful it was. But yeah, so it was, again, sort of that little moment of magic happened quite early on in the creative process, and allowed us to plan those executions, and also influence the rest of the campaign. If we hadn't been open to this sort of unexpected way of thinking and this sort of leaving room for the magic, then other things within the campaign wouldn't have happened. And just as an aside, everything that we did was eco-friendly as well. So the post that you saw that we set on fire was actually water vapour. All the materials used were 100% recyclable as well. So the next one I'm going to talk about is for Travel Supermarket. So you've seen the burning billboard, now meet the inflatable billboard. So this is actually a really recent piece of work that we did about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And like I say, yeah, so it was for a new client of ours, Travel Supermarket, and it was to bring to life a new proposition that we created for them, which is all around when you're called Travel Supermarket, then it's absolutely blindingly obvious what you do. You're a supermarket for travel, so it does exactly what it says on the tin, so to speak. So we smashed together the worlds of travel and supermarkets by stacking 108 pool inflatables on top of each other into a trolley and then attached it to a billboard, creating this sort of 6-metre high special build, and it like stood out a mile. So this was actually in that wouldn't it be amazing if we did this one day section of the pitch when we presented to the when we pitched for the business originally, and actually it was our client at Travel Supermarket, Steve Seddon, who circled back to this idea and asked us to make it, basically, which is amazing. It goes to show that when that sort of philosophy is shared by us, our media partners, but also our clients, then it's more likely to take hold. It's more likely to come to fruition. So that was a really great moment to see. So most of what I've shown you is sort of, and what you've seen is billboards, and billboards work really well for this sort of thing because they're so impactful. They're sort of right there as a media. It stops you in your tracks. It's out in the real world and it demands your attention. And sort of out of home and billboards have become a social media platform as well, more and more. And it's not about the hundreds of people that just walk by them and see them. It's about the thousands of people that share them and talk about them online, and the press that picks up and the PR that you get from it. But just to show that this sort of thinking doesn't have just to be out of home, I'm going to talk to you about the time that we locked Noddy Holder in a room for a week. So this was from a couple of years ago, and was was a campaign at the time when the World Cup and Christmas clashed for the first time ever. And with that came a bit of an opportunity to show people that Iceland isn't just for Christmas, but it's for the World Cup too. But with Iceland have a fraction of the marketing spend that the big retailers have, particularly at Christmas. They're outspent hugely, so we had to really stand out. So we did that by hiring the man renowned for getting Christmas going. When you hear Merry Christmas, everyone, you know Christmas has started. So we stopped him from saying that. We stopped him from singing that song until the World Cup was over, or at least until England were knocked out of the World Cup. So yeah, we launched with this sort of live feed of Noddy, locked away in this room. You could log on at any point, at any time of the day, and see what he was up to. And he got up to a lot, as you can see. But at its heart, this campaign was really like a really hard-working retail campaign. It had to do a lot of heavy lifting. But at its heart had a really solid idea that we bolstered by this extra little bit of thinking that wasn't, part of the media plan. The media plan was all about TV. It was all about, hammering home those retail messages. But we had made a real impact by creating this sort of Not Yet Noddy campaign alongside it. And actually, we like to judge a lot of the work that we do by this impact that it has on culture. This campaign was actually talked about on This Morning for about 5 minutes in one of their festive segments. So again, just shows the power that this sort of thinking can have and the sort of cut through that it can create. And then last thing I want to talk about that sort of comes about from this sort of thinking, and just to prove that you can do it for absolutely anything, any medium at all, I'm going to talk briefly about the time that we sent an all-staff email from Alan Patridge to everyone at the BBC. So this was quite a simple one, really. Sort of programmes and dramas and comedies often follow quite a formulaic launch plan. It's a clip-based trailer supported by posters with key art with the talent. But at this point, the leaving room for the magic was become a bit of an expectation. So, when it was right to do so. So we got to thinking about how we could bolster this campaign as well. But we didn't have any money left, so we had to think quite creatively this time. And again, there was a really succinct case study that would show this. But basically, we sent an all-staff email to the 26,000 employees that we knew would engage with it at the BBC, and that got it out into the real world, and it really took off. You could see all the people that talked about it, and lots of people tweeted about it. But it had a real impact. Oh, this one did play. Well, I've explained it now anyway. I knew the last one would play. But anyway, so what's your point, Tim? So my point that this sort of thinking doesn't happen in isolation. So I'm not saying that every media plan has to be left wide open, but if you just leave a little bit of room or set a little bit of budget aside for this sort of thinking, it can really pay you back. It can really have a huge impact, and it can really elevate your existing campaigns. And just one more thing before I go, a little Columbo joke for anyone in the room that was born before 1989. This sort of thinking isn't just confined to media and creative either. We deploy this sort of thinking with our media, with our PR and comms partners as well. We do it with our production partners as well, and we really urge you to do it with your clients. Sort of collaborate as early as you can and as often as you can, and it will really pay dividends. Thanks. Cheers,